Welcome to Godless and Grounded. Religion has given the world countless traditions that many people never stop to question. These traditions are passed down through families, reinforced by communities, and repeated so often that they start to feel natural, even when they make absolutely no sense. The funny thing is, once you step back and look at them from a neutral point of view, you realize how strange, unnecessary, and at times even harmful these practices are. People often think traditions are sacred simply because they are old, but age doesn't make something rational. If it did, we would still believe that the earth is flat or that diseases are caused by angry spirits hiding in the body. Today, I want to explore some of the most nonsensical religious traditions ever created by human beings, and when we shine light on them, you will see how absurd they really are. One of the most obvious examples comes from food restrictions. Every major religion has some version of dietary rules. Some religions ban pork, others forbid beef, and some restrict shellfish. In ancient times, these rules probably made sense because refrigeration did not exist, and eating certain foods could lead to illness. But in today's world, where we have advanced cooking methods and food safety standards, these rules are nothing more than leftovers from a primitive age. A person could be starving, yet the food in front of them becomes untouchable simply because an ancient book said so. Imagine rejecting nutritious food because someone thousands of years ago decided pigs or cows were off limits. These rules no longer protect people. They just create artificial divisions. For example, a Hindu and a Muslim might sit at the same table but cannot share a meal because one considers the cow sacred and the other sees the pig as filthy. These unnecessary rules divide people rather than bring them together. Another tradition that stands out as nonsensical is ritual bathing or purification ceremonies. In many religions, people are taught that water has the magical ability to wash away sin. From baptism to ritual baths before prayer, the idea is the same. That by dipping in a river or sprinkling water on the head, invisible moral stains disappear. But think about it rationally. Water can clean dirt, but can it really erase dishonesty, cruelty, or greed? If someone cheats, lies, or harms another, no amount of water can undo the damage. Yet people still believe in these symbolic cleansings as though they have real power. The river Ganges in India, for example, is one of the most polluted rivers in the world, filled with sewage, industrial waste, and even human remains. Still, millions of Hindus bathe in it every year, convinced that it purifies their soul. In reality, it often gives them diseases. This is the irony of blind tradition. People risk their health to perform rituals that were never meaningful in the first place. Then there are fasting traditions. In many religions, fasting is seen as a way to purify the soul, gain spiritual merit, or punish the body to please a higher being. But fasting, especially when practiced in extreme forms, often makes no logical sense. For example, during Ramadan, Muslims fast from sunrise to sunset, but then feast after sunset, sometimes eating more than they normally would. What kind of test of discipline is that? You restrict yourself for part of the day, but make up for it with lavish meals at night. Similarly, Catholics used to forbid eating meat on Fridays, but allowed fish, as if fish is not also meat. The logic behind such rules collapses when you examine them closely. These practices do not purify anyone's soul. They just manipulate human behavior with arbitrary rules. Another nonsensical tradition is the obsession with ritual clothing. Many religions dictate what people must wear, often in the name of modesty or holiness. Some require head coverings, some demand specific colors, and some even forbid mixing fabrics. The Bible, for instance, prohibits wearing clothes made of two different kinds of fabric. That might have mattered to ancient shepherds, but today it's absurd to think your choice of polyester cotton blend could anger an almighty God. In certain Islamic traditions, women are forced to cover themselves entirely, even in scorching heat, as if their natural bodies are shameful or dangerous. These clothing rules are not divine. They are cultural tools used to control people, especially women, and yet they continue to be followed, defended, and even enforced by law in some countries. Circumcision is another tradition that deserves attention. Performed mainly in Jewish and Islamic communities, circumcision is the cutting of a baby boy's foreskin. This happens without the child's consent, often when he is only a few days old. It is painful, unnecessary, and in some cases dangerous, yet it continues simply because it is considered a sacred tradition. Imagine if a random person tried to cut part of a baby's body for no medical reason. Everyone would call it abuse. But when done in the name of religion, people applaud it as holy. This is one of those clear examples where tradition overrides basic human rights and common sense. Superstitious rituals also fill the religious world. People burn incense, ring bells, chant words, and walk in circles, believing these actions please gods or drive away evil spirits. But what do these gestures actually achieve? If you burn incense, the only thing that happens is your room smells different. If you walk around a stone building 7 times, nothing changes in the universe. Yet millions of people travel to holy sites to perform such meaningless acts. Take the Hajj pilgrimage in Islam, where millions of Muslims circle the Kaaba in Mecca. The Kaaba is simply a cube-shaped building made of stone, but believers attribute supernatural importance to it. They kiss it, touch it, and believe it connects them to God. From an outsider's perspective, it looks like mass idol worship, even though Muslims insist they do not worship idols. The contradiction is obvious, but tradition blinds people to it. Then there are extreme practices like self-flagellation or walking on fire. In some Christian sects, believers whip themselves to imitate the suffering of Jesus, thinking pain brings them closer to God. In certain Hindu traditions, devotees pierce their bodies with hooks or walk barefoot on burning coals as acts of devotion. These rituals are not just nonsensical, they are harmful. They glorify pain and suffering rather than promoting well-being or compassion. A rational person would see them as dangerous acts of self-harm, but inside the framework of tradition, they are praised as spiritual achievements. Another odd religious tradition is relic worship. In Catholicism, pieces of bone, hair, or clothing from saints are preserved and displayed in churches, and people pray to them as if they contain magical power. There are churches that claim to have the milk of the Virgin Mary, the foreskin of Jesus, or fragments of the cross. Often these relics are fake, but believers treat them with reverence anyway. Think about how absurd this is. If someone today claimed they had a toenail clipping from a famous spiritual leader, no one would care. But attach the name of a religious figure, and suddenly people bow down before it. These traditions persist because people confuse symbolism with reality. One cannot forget the obsession with numbers and rituals in prayer. Many religions demand prayers at specific times, facing specific directions, and repeated a specific number of times. In Islam, for example, prayers are performed 5 times a day, always facing Mecca, with a set number of movements. In Catholicism, believers repeat prayers like the Rosary dozens of times. These routines may give people structure, but the idea that a God cares whether you bow 3 times or 5, or face east instead of west, is deeply nonsensical. If an all-knowing, all-powerful being exists, would it really be obsessed with such trivial details? The only explanation is that humans invented these traditions, projecting their own love for rules and order onto their gods. Another tradition that makes little sense is confession to priests. In Catholicism, people are told they must confess their sins to a priest in order to be forgiven. Think about how irrational this is. You may have lied to a friend, cheated in business, or harmed someone, yet instead of apologizing to the person you wronged, you whisper your mistakes to a man in a robe. The priest then absolves you, and supposedly God forgives you. This bypasses personal accountability entirely. If anything, it encourages people to repeat bad behavior, since they can always confess again later. It is a moral loophole dressed up as a sacred ritual. Religious holidays also carry strange traditions. Take Easter, a Christian holiday supposedly celebrating the resurrection of Jesus. Somehow, this sacred event is linked to bunnies and chocolate eggs. Christmas, said to celebrate the birth of Jesus, is filled with pagan traditions like decorated trees, mistletoe, and gift-giving. These are cultural leftovers that make no theological sense, yet billions of people celebrate them without question. In Hinduism, there are festivals where statues of gods are dunked into rivers, polluting the water with paint and chemicals. In many Islamic cultures, animals are slaughtered by the millions during Eid al-Adha, even in cities where meat is abundant and the ritual serves no practical purpose. These traditions are not just nonsensical, they are wasteful and harmful to the environment. Some traditions revolve around death, and they too are often irrational. In certain cultures, families spend huge amounts of money on elaborate funerals, believing it will help the dead in the afterlife. In Catholicism, people once paid for masses to be said for the souls of the departed, as if money could shorten their time in purgatory. In Hinduism, bodies are burned on riverbanks, polluting waterways, while in other traditions, corpses are left exposed for scavenger birds. Another tradition that highlights the strangeness of religious practices is the obsession with animal sacrifices. Across history and still in many cultures today, animals are slaughtered in the name of gods. Ancient civilizations like the Aztecs and Greeks believed that blood offerings would please deities and ensure good harvests or victory in war. In Hinduism, certain temples still conduct animal sacrifices, and in Islam, the ritual slaughter during Eid al-Adha is performed by millions every year. Imagine thinking that an all-powerful being who supposedly created the universe cares about the throat of a goat or the blood of a cow. It makes no sense at all. If a deity is truly almighty, why would it need animal flesh and blood? These traditions are nothing more than remnants of primitive tribal thinking, where sacrifice was thought to have magical power over nature. Yet today, they are defended as sacred, even though they cause immense suffering to animals and waste resources that could feed the hungry. Another bizarre religious tradition is the belief in holy objects, or charms that supposedly carry divine power. From rosaries and crucifixes to amulets, talismans, and prayer beads, people are convinced that carrying a small object can protect them from harm or bring them luck. For example, Muslims believe in using prayer beads called tasbih to count repetitions of divine names, as if reciting words multiple times increases their effectiveness. Catholics carry rosaries, Hindus wear threads, and Buddhists carry charms. The underlying logic is magical thinking. People transfer spiritual power to physical objects and then treat those objects as protective shields. But in reality, a bead is just a bead, a thread is just a thread, and a necklace is just a necklace. The power attributed to them is purely imagined. Then we have traditions surrounding marriage that are dictated by religion. In many faiths, marriage is not seen simply as a social contract between two individuals, but as a sacred ritual that must follow strict procedures. For instance, in Hindu weddings, families spend enormous amounts of money on elaborate ceremonies, involving fire rituals, chanting, and offerings to gods. In Christianity, the wedding must take place in a church with the approval of clergy. In Islam, a marriage contract must include religious witnesses and specific prayers. But what difference do these rituals make to the actual relationship? A couple's success depends on their compatibility, respect, and love, not whether a priest blessed their union or whether they walked around a fire 7 times. Yet entire families treat these ceremonies as more important than the relationship itself, sometimes even going into debt to perform them. Supernatural healing rituals also fall under nonsensical traditions. In many religious communities, people believe that prayer, holy water, or the touch of a healer can cure illnesses. From Catholic priests performing exorcisms to Pentecostal preachers promising to heal cancer through laying hands, these practices exploit the desperate. In India, people still visit temples or gurus who claim to cure diseases with chants and ashes. In Islam, some believe in drinking Zamzam water from Mecca as a cure-all. These practices can be dangerous because they discourage people from seeking real medical treatment. Countless people have died believing that faith could heal them while avoiding hospitals and doctors. This is one of the clearest examples of how blind faith in tradition can cause real harm. A particularly absurd tradition is the practice of speaking in tongues, common in some Christian sects. Believers suddenly burst into meaningless sounds, convinced they are speaking the language of angels or communicating directly with God. From an outside perspective, it looks like random babbling. Linguists have studied this phenomenon and found that it is not a real language at all, just nonsense syllables made up in emotional states. Yet entire communities treat it as sacred. This is a reminder of how easily humans can convince themselves that meaningless noise carries divine meaning if they are primed to believe so. Another strange tradition is the obsession with relics of places rather than people. For example, in Islam, people kiss or touch the black stone in the Kaaba, believing it is holy. In Catholicism, pilgrims travel to kiss the feet of statues or touch shrines. In Hinduism, devotees press their foreheads against temple walls, convinced it transfers blessing. The idea that touching stone, metal, or wood could bring good fortune is nothing but superstition. If the same act were performed outside of religion, people would laugh at it. Imagine someone insisting on touching a random rock on the street every day for luck. Yet when wrapped in the cloak of religion, these acts are defended fiercely as sacred traditions. There are also bizarre traditions around the handling of scriptures. In many religions, holy books must be treated with special care. In Islam, the Quran cannot be placed on the ground and must be read only in a state of ritual purity. In Judaism, worn-out Torah scrolls are buried in cemeteries instead of being thrown away. In Christianity, the Bible is often kissed before reading. These practices treat books made of paper and ink as though they are divine objects. But the truth is, a book is just an object. The ideas inside may be influential, but the physical pages have no supernatural power. If people applied the same reverence to all books, libraries would look like temples. But because these texts are labeled holy, ordinary rules of logic are suspended. Another nonsensical tradition is the use of prayer wheels, prayer flags, or written charms. In Tibetan Buddhism, for instance, people believe that spinning a wheel inscribed with prayers has the same effect as reciting the prayers. Similarly, prayer flags are believed to spread blessings with the wind. This idea collapses under basic reasoning. If you can outsource prayer to objects, why pray at all? Why not build a giant windmill with prayers written on the blades and let the wind do all the work? These traditions expose the mechanical, superstitious mindset behind many rituals. The act becomes more important than the meaning. Funerary rituals also contain bizarre traditions. In some Christian sects, people believe that burying the body in consecrated ground ensures the soul's safety. In Hinduism, ashes are scattered in rivers to secure blessings for the afterlife. In ancient China, families buried food, money, and even servants with the dead to provide for them in the next life. These practices all assume that the dead somehow continue to need material things, even though the body has clearly stopped functioning. What these traditions really reveal is human denial of death and the desire to imagine continuity. But instead of facing mortality directly, people build elaborate rituals around it. Religious calendars are also filled with oddities. Different faiths calculate time according to lunar or solar cycles, often leading to holidays that shift unpredictably. For example, Islamic holidays move by about 10 days each year, so Ramadan can fall in summer or winter. Hindu calendars involve complex astrological calculations to determine festival dates. The result is confusion and inconsistency. If a divine being wanted humans to follow certain sacred times, surely the instructions would be clear and universal. Instead, we see chaotic systems invented by humans trying to impose order on the sky. We can also look at oath-taking traditions. In many countries, people still swear on religious texts like the Bible or Quran in courts, as if placing a hand on a book makes someone more honest. But history shows that believers lie, cheat, and commit crimes as often as anyone else. Swearing on a book does not guarantee truthfulness. It just reflects cultural habits. If anything, it gives a false sense of trustworthiness to someone who might be lying anyway. This tradition has no logical foundation but persists because people are conditioned to associate holy books with morality. We should also mention exorcisms, which are still practiced in many parts of the world. People believe that evil spirits possess humans and can be driven out by prayers, rituals, or holy water. Catholic priests still perform exorcisms, and in many African and Asian countries, exorcisms are common. These practices often involve abuse, beating, or even death of the supposed possessed person. In reality, most cases are symptoms of mental illness. Instead of helping the person with proper care, traditions force them into terrifying rituals. This is another case where religion takes ignorance and turns it into a sacred act. When we step back and view these traditions with fresh eyes, they appear not divine, but deeply human. They are habits, superstitions, and cultural practices frozen in time, defended with religious justification. The more we question them, the more obvious their absurdity becomes. And once you see them for what they are, it becomes impossible to unsee the nonsense. Religion, at its core, is a collection of human traditions dressed up as sacred commands, and nowhere is this clearer than in the rituals and practices people perform daily without ever asking why.